Hello, good evening. Thank you for your patience. We were trying to wait a few minutes for the last stragglers that may come in. But thank you so much for being here tonight, and welcome to the Italian Cultural Institute of Washington. Tonight we open the fourth Mid-Atlantic edition of Il Cinema Ritrovato on Tour, a film festival organized with the Italian program and the program in Cinema and Media Studies at the University of Maryland College Park, with the Cineteca di Bologna and with the support of several other local partners: Spain Arts and Cultures, National Gallery of Art, and AFI Silver Theatre and Cultural Center. Tonight's event is dedicated to film restoration as a way to preserve memories, history, and culture for future generations. But before we start, I would like to thank the people who have made this project possible. My appreciation goes to Dr. Valeria Federici from the Italian program at UMD, who is the driving force behind this extraordinary initiative. I would also like to thank our speakers, Ms. Celine Stephanie Pozzi from the laboratories of L'Immagine Ritrovata, audiovisual curator, archivist, and historian Dr. Kim Tomajoglu, and Ms. Siobhan Hagen, founder and president of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Movie Image Archive, as well as tonight's moderator, Dr. Mauro Respini, associate professor of cinema and media studies at Italian UMD. I would also like to thank the staff of the Italian Cultural Institute, so Carlotta, Michele, Pasquale, Ferruccio, and Antonio. Finally, thank you, all of you, for being here tonight, and I hope you will enjoy this interesting conversation. Without further ado, I'll leave the floor to Dr. Valeria Federici.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Valeria Federici. I'm a faculty member of the Italian program in the Department of French and Italian at the School of Languages, Literatures and Cultures at the University of Maryland. That is a long title, isn't it? And I'm one of the co-organizers of this film festival, along with Luca Arsenio and Mauro Resmini, already mentioned, who I thank for their flexibility, their commitment to this project, and their trust. I'm extremely honored to be here tonight in this venue and to introduce this year's edition of Il Cinema Ritrovato on Tour. But please bear with me, since the list of those I have to thank during these brief remarks, I promise, is a long one. As I said before, and I will not get tired of saying, it takes a village to put together something like this, and the village deserves recognition. 4 editions in and counting, we have arrived at a 5-day event with not only international restored films, but also international guests. This was possible first and foremost thanks to the collaboration with the Italian Cultural Institute of Washington. And I want to thank sincerely the director, Elettra Laduca, for this opportunity, as well as the staff of the Italian Cultural Institute, Carlotta Maduzzi, Ferruccio Magatelli, Pasquale Intermoia, and the interns, and I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, and I apologize for that, but for their help and guidance. It has been a great opportunity and fun collaboration, and on behalf of the Italian program, I can only express my deepest gratitude for it. Tonight, you're not here to listen to me, but we're here for a discussion on film restoration, which is at the core of Il Cinema Ritrovato Film Festival. And we are thrilled to have Celine Stephanie Pozzi joining us all the way from Bologna, Italy, specifically from the laboratories of L'Immagine Ritrovata, in conversation, as you already heard, with Dr. Kim Tomajoglu and Siobhan Hagen. L'Immagine Ritrovata is part of the Bologna Film Archive, the Cineteca di Bologna, which is our main partner in this project. And none of this could be possible without them. And without Guy Borlet, coordinator of Il Cinema Ritrovato, who could not be here with us tonight, but we truly hope to be able to host him in the future here in DC. Moving along with the village. Right? I wish to thank the director of the School of Languages, Literatures and Cultures at the University of Maryland, Mel Scullin, and my colleagues that year after year continue to offer their support, commit to the department funding, volunteer to speak at our events, roundtables, and discussions about these classics. And by so doing, they help our students and the general public to put these films in perspective, and therefore to truly enjoy them. Speaking of students, please give a round of applause to our graduate students, volunteers, Valentina Rosales, Enrique Edel, who with their talent make everything about this event look so beautiful, from the brochures to the poster, videos. If you look at our website, there's nothing they can't do. And I want to thank them. And I don't know what I'm going to do once they graduate. So please give a round of applause to them. So returning to my colleagues, I want to thank Caroline Hitz, chair of the program in Cinema and Media Studies. The Italian program and the program in Cinema and Media Studies have embarked in this adventure together back in 2001, and here we are. But others have been showing their support all along. In particular, I want to thank Valerie Orlando, chair of the Department of French and Italian, Manella Corte, chair of the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. They will be the main players tomorrow night on our campus on College Park as we celebrate Spanish filmmaker Luis Buñuel with another of our international guests, Javier Espada, who will discuss his documentary on the life and work of Buñuel, following which we will screen one of his most celebrated films, Belle de Jour. This programming was made possible also thanks to the tireless efforts of Professor José Najarro Calderón and the generosity of the Cultural Office of the Embassy of Spain. So the list is getting longer, I know, I warned you, but I'll get there. I absolutely must thank AFI Silver Theatre and Cultural Center in Silver Spring, Maryland, in particular the director Todd Hitchcock and the director of programming Abi Algar, for joining in and be part of Il Cinema Ritrovato on tour this year. On Friday, March 8th, they will host the screening of two silent era films with live musical accompaniment by renowned composer Donald Sossin. That is a not-to-be-missed event. I also have to thank them for forging this new partnership with us and for hosting one of the festival interns, Kate Wachter, a UND senior who is doing a minor in Italian, and Kate has been a tremendous addition to this year's team. I want to thank her personally. As this is day one of our event, right? So it seems out of place now that I'm going to speak about the conclusion already, but I'm electrified about the festival's two final days at the National Gallery of Art. They will be entirely dedicated to a celebration of someone who US artist Nan Golding has recently defined as one of Italy's national treasures, and there's no shortage of those. And I'm speaking of Anna Magnani, of course. The National Gallery of Art, together with Il Cinema Ritrovato on tour, will feature 3 films with Magnani at her best. Una Voce Umana and Angelina on Saturday, what a better way to end, excuse me, and the grand finale, Rome Open City, Roma Città Aperta on Sunday. And what a better way to celebrate Women's History Month, isn't it? So I want to thank Joanna Racinska for her unconditional support of this event. Allow me one more thank you to my colleagues of the Italian program, the director of the program, Dr. Giuseppe Falvo, the aforementioned Dr. Resmini, as well as Dr. Mirella Vaglio and Alessandra Gavagni. Finally, back to l'Immagine Ritrovata. Their laboratories are fascinating to me. Their conservation experts bring these films back to life, making possible to relieve the emotions and the sense of wonder one experiences when watching a movie in the theater. I can't tell you how excited I am for this discussion, which will be moderated by my colleague already mentioned, Resmiri, and followed by a Q&A. Please don't be shy with questions. Mauro Resmini is Assistant Professor of Italian and Cinema and Media Studies at the University of Maryland. He received his PhD from the Department of Italian Studies and Modern Culture and Media at Brown University in 2014. He is the author of a monograph on the work of Steven Spielberg, published also in 2014, and has published essays on Italian and European cinema and media, psychoanalysis, and critical theory. His recent book, Italian Political Cinema, Figures of the Long 68, was published by University of Minnesota in 2012. I leave the floor to the protagonists of tonight and to Mauro for a proper introduction of our guest speakers, who I thank again for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us tonight. I hope I have not forgotten anyone. If I did, I'm the only responsible, the only one to blame. To you all, again, thank you all for being here. We do this for our students and, of course, for you who kindly joined us tonight. Thank you for your support. Enjoy the conversation. Please take the festival program with you and join us for the rest of this week's event. Thank you so much.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, very good. So I've been thanked at least 3 or 4 times today, so I can consider myself happy. So I'm going to introduce the panelists in strict alphabetical order. Siobhan C. Hagan holds her MA in Moving Image Archiving and Preservation from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and has worked in a variety of collecting organizations throughout her career, including the UCLA Library, the National Aquarium, and the Smithsonian. She's the founder, president, and CEO of the Baltimore-based nonprofit, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Moving Image Archive, MARMIA. Siobhan's passion is the preservation and access of community and personal archives, along with teaching preservation skills to memory workers from Baltimore, Maryland to Zaječar, Serbia. She has been active as a member of the Association of Moving Image Archivists, MIAI, as co-chair of the local TV task force, chair of the regional audiovisual archives, and a member of the election committee. Siobhan was also an AMIA director of the board from 2015 to 2017. Celine Stephanie Pozzi has been working at L'Immagine Ritrovata since 2003, first in the film repair department, where she started as an intern, then switched to digital in 2006 and became head of the digital restoration in 2008. But she's still an analog film fan, she wants you to know. In 2019, she became project manager. Along the years, she has been also actively involved in the organization of internal training at L'Immagine Ritrovata, recruitment, and public relations at film markets such as Hong Kong and Lyon. She has been part of the faculty at the FIAF, International Federation of Film Archives, Film Restoration School, since 2007. As faculty, she taught about the digital restoration workflow at the Film Preservation and Restoration School in Mumbai, India, in 2015 and then again in 2022. Kim Tomajoglu, last but not least, is an audiovisual curator, archivist, and historian specializing in rights clearances, preservation, collections management, and programming. She has curated retrospectives at museums and festivals internationally and has published essays on women's film history, early cinema, and preservation. She served as director of the American Film Institute's National Collection and as principal liaison to the Library of Congress, where she was a Kluge Fellow in 2019. Recently, for the National Film Preservation Foundation, she completed a study and finding aid on pre-1916 single-reel subjects held by the National Audiovisual Conservation Center. Her most recent publication, the title is Her Eyes That Saw, Maria Adriana Prolo Dreams of a Museum in Cinema, in Cinema in the Eye of the Collector, which is forthcoming in 2024, addresses the collecting practices of Maria Adriana Prolo, the founder and director of Il Museo Nazionale del Cinema in Torino, Italy. So please join me in welcoming our guests today. Okay, so I'll try to speak as little as possible so as to let our guests speak more. So I thought we would start maybe with kind of like a more general question to kind of like provide a basic definition of the general terminology that we're going to use in this discussion. So, and I'm addressing this question to all of you, but maybe specifically to Kim first. How would you characterize the difference and explain the difference between preservation, restoration, and conservation?
First of all, thank you everyone for coming, and it's a pleasure to be here and speak about the field of film preservation, restoration, and conservation. And I thought it was important to include that as an opening, so as I think people are more familiar with the term preservation, especially in the United States. I mean, and I'll explain a little bit more why. Just to contextualize, in the United States, if we think about moving image collections, we think of naturally the National Collection, which is at the Library of Congress. It is now in Culpeper, Virginia, in a facility called the National Audiovisual Conservation Center. So what do we mean by preservation? Preservation initially was initiated in this country really through the American Film Institute when legislation was created by Lyndon Johnson in 1976 through the National Endowment. And he created the AFI as part of the NEA specifically to deal with the National Film Collection itself. And the reason that it was so important at the time was because the library actually started collecting moving images, we would say since 1912, when copyright law, which was the general law, was amended to include motion pictures. The problem is when they started collecting films through copyright deposits for legal protection, they didn't anticipate the problems of dealing with nitrate cellulose film, which was hazardous. So there were these issues of storage, cost, and also the flammability of nitrate. So what the library decided was, instead of for somebody that made a film and you were going to get legal protection through copyright, you would submit documentation. Initially, it was through paper rolls, which, if people aren't familiar, are still images of films. It may not be the complete film, but they are on paper rolls like a photograph. So this went on paper rolls or just a document, a paper document. They call it the paper era till 1942. And in 1942, the Librarian of Congress at the time, McLeish, decided, okay, wait a minute, we need to really collect, like physical copies. And what happened is the whole era of paper registration, all those nitrate films that would have come in, they were either destroyed because in the country, nitrate was destroyed for its silver value, also because it was hazardous, it just wasn't being collected. Some people may have had it in their homes, some theaters may have had it. We don't, it's just kind of mixed situation, but they felt that that important part of film history, because nitrate cellulose film stock was the first film stock, would have been lost. So moving forward to 1976, when Johnson created the AFI, the original mandate of the AFI was preservation, i.e. preservation meant to actively collect, especially nitrate, silent era films that mostly lost, and to store them. And that's what they did. Then more complications came. But initially, preservation meant collecting, sort of safeguarding, and just making a copy, not doing anything at all, just making a black and white copy. And gradually, that actually stayed in existence. It's still actually part of the mission. And gradually what happened was, as we move into the 1980s, 90s, especially the 90s, you start thinking about, okay, all this film sitting in a storage area. What are we doing with it? We're saving it. So initially, it's saving cinema, okay, saving it, but who's seeing it? So what happens is, in the 1990s in Europe, there's a push towards restoring films, okay? I looked on my bookshelf today, and my colleagues at L'Imaginaire Ritrovato were some of the first people to write a publication on the theory and methodology of restoration. So what's restoration? Restoration is an intervention in the artifact. It's making it, you have to consider, if you have nitrate film, it's old, it's damaged, it's whatever, you can't put it up for someone to see if it's damaged. The public doesn't want to see it. So you're making it accessible through restoration by intervening into the artifact itself. What do I mean by intervening? Okay, if it's a print, the titles are missing, you may add the titles in. If there's a scene missing, you may add in an explanation, this part of the narrative, whatever. But this kind of push away from just storage and collecting and making just a copy of it as is gets transferred over to Europe, and it's more restoration. And I think probably, I'd have to research it, it's because of art. It's like following art history too. I lived in Rome for many years, and I remember when the Sistine Chapel was restored, everybody was like, oh my God, the colors were so brilliant. It was a Japanese restoration. They were like, so it's an intervention, but actually you have to bring it into context with the time. When people are going to see things, again, it's the public. You want to make it accessible for them to see. People don't want to see something that is damaged or dirty, unless you're a historian and you're really fascinated by that. They want to see something that they can relate to in a present context, and that's aesthetic. The restoration is intervention into the artifact itself, and it can be many ways. Celine will probably talk about conservation. Again, the Library of Congress's center is National Audiovisual Conservation Center, is really storage and safeguarding with the proper conditions, climate control, humidity, the proper cans, catalog. I mean, these terms can be interchangeable and they differ from country to country, but that's sort of just a very simple overview of how the field kind of developed. Again, there hasn't ever been a history of film preservation restoration ever written, but this is sort of how it came about. And the end goal really was, start off, collect, save, make accessible, restore. Again, it's keeping in mind, making it, and Celine will talk about this, we'll all talk about digital. How can we make it more accessible to more people? And how is an easier way? So that's basic.
Thank you, Kim. I think, since kind of like trying to stay true to the title of our round table, so film restoration from analog to digital, I think it would be interesting to kind of like introduce this idea of the digital turn in film restoration and kind of like start thinking about what is the role that the digital plays in the process of restoring, preserving films. So I'm thinking, I'm addressing this to Siobhan and then Celine, maybe, who wants to go first?
Oh, I feel like Celine, you got this, girl. Like, yeah, I think the main thing to me is that I am humbled to be up here with this group, with these ladies. And,
Me too.
And that, yeah, and that I mostly am not, like, that was the first thing I said to everyone was that I don't restore films. So that's sort of my own little, like, imposter syndrome being up here, but I feel like, at least from the work I do in like community archiving and personal archiving and regional archiving, sort of this like more do-it-yourself, scrappy way of doing things is informed by everything that folks do at the higher up places that are doing more best practices for restoration and have just done so much research and so much trial and error and labor put into researching this. And then also this digital turn is really what helps make places like Armia, where the organization that I started, really helps us like exist because of the fact that like digital storage is cheaper than physical storage a lot of times. The accessibility of digital media is much easier for more folks and for smaller organizations like ours, as far as the like technological needs and costs of those needs. So mostly for me, the technological turn is where we're able to even exist, but also want to set that up with the fact that it's based on all this work that has been previously done. And I'm gonna get away from there and set up.
Okay, so first of all, I'm very happy to be here and with all these people and to share something about film restoration. So first things I want to say that the lab is really the place where people like archivists and students and researchers, private and public collection, find someone who's going to practically do this act of going from analog to digital. And but in our work of restoration, for us, it's also very important. Something that Kim just said also is the preservation part. What we try to do when we receive the film, because we are specialized in 35 millimeter films, so on film, is to give back the film in better condition to the archive than what arrived in the lab. In the history of the lab, we had very extreme destroyed film. One example above all is some years ago in a cinema in the south of Italy, on the floor of an old cinema which was closed. There was a photographer who was doing like urbex to find places, old places, ruins, and he found this piece of film in the floor. So he really collected everything that he could, and he put it in a bag. But he saw some images, and he said, "I think it's a film from one of the first film of Rossellini." So it was not a feature film, but an animation he was doing for the first company he was working for. And he thought it was a good idea to wash it before, which we say no. But when he came with us, it was already done. So he came with this blue bag with pieces, and that was we had. And so it was weeks and weeks of work of our angels from film repair that were really taking away the mold and the mud from the film, and putting back together pieces which were small like a puzzle. The only things that was leading us in this reconstruction was the fact that there was a sound. So every time we had a little piece with a sound, we tried to scan it and to listen to it to put all the other pieces together. And that was a very a very long work. But we were able at the end to reconstruct part of this film, which is called Il ruscello di Ripassottile, which is the river of Ripassottile, and it's a story for children. It's shot from an aquarium, but it's the story of the animals having adventures. So there's a fish, there's a frog. I mean, it's a very nice animation that I think even today children would like, because they are more interested in all things that we thought. I remember, sorry if I, but in a festival specialized in silent movies, like 20 years ago, I think, yes, they had this screening of the first Jurassic Park film, which is a movie from the 20s. And so the children wanted absolutely to see the movies, and the parents say, "Yes, hey, let's go." But when they came to the cinema and they discovered it was a silent movie, they were very disappointed. So they get in, and then they started to go mad. But the children wanted to stay because for them it was even closer to their world, because it was stop motion. So they were like the dinosaurs they had at home. So they felt close, while the parents were completely annoyed by the film, etc. But it was a very thing. But going back to restoration, so this first part is very important, and because the time passed, archive have improved their means to preserve the films in cellars. There has been also, especially in Europe, a lot of European funding to not only to digitize the heritage, but also to build new facility for that. Also, Cineteca di Bologna has, in the past year, was able to build a special cellars for nitrate. Because nitrate is it's dangerous because of cell combustion, because of the heat and the lights. So it really needs to stay at a low temperature, and the building needs to be built in a special way. So if something happens and it takes fire, the fire will go up, and they are kept in small cellars, so the fire will not go through the other cellars. So it's complicated. And I can tell you that we had a fire some years ago, and one of the can was founded like kilometers away from the from the facility. But at least all the let's say security system worked. So we just lost a couple of reels, but were not the most precious one. But it happens. So at a certain point, it's also important to restore. So to keep memory of these images, and to be able to share those images. And to do that, you need the technology. That's what you need. And you need the old one and the latest one. So a film restoration laboratory is like a museum where you can find a lot of industrial archaeology of film history. At the beginning, when we started until 2006, 2009, we didn't have a proper digital lab. We were all doing analogic work. So we had the machine to make splices, to cut on a viewing table. We had what we call in Europe Truca, so machine like the multiplane, so you can make animations, you can make intertitles. Then, of course, we have a processing machine, a printing machine. So everything was done like in the old times when we were restoring silent movies that have intertitles. We were printing the image and then the intertitles. And then you have these little rolls, and everybody was there by hand cutting the intertitles and splicing it to the film. And so the way that in the history of cinema, it was a work for ladies, the editing, because they had the passions to do it. In our lab, which is also something special, in Italy, we are more women than men. And when some people from Rome came the first time, because Rome is cinema in Italy, so they say we are the cinema, and we were a little things outside Rome. And the people from the Cinecittà, Istituto Luce came and they say, oh, but there's a lot of women here, also in men's work, which was the printing and the processing, because it had to move reels. So it was a physical job. And but when digital arrived, that was, I think, the beginning of really the era of restoration. Because, for example, we were told with Kim, we worked on a silent movie. And when we went back to that work, I was looking through my documents, and the restoration was done in 2007.
Yes.
2007. So I thought how many things have changed in the lab, and the amazing technology we have now. Because when we were working, for example, with Sant'Anata, we struggled a lot with technology because the scan was not a real scan like today. So we had problems of light, of registration of information from analog to digital, something we were not able to to properly work it. So it was a work that we did at our best, but we felt that some technology was missing for that. So this is the film we worked on.
It's Italy's first woman film director, Elvira Notari, and there are only 3 extant feature films by Elvira Notari. That's why it was very important to restore this film. And she was from Naples. She had her own company. Her husband was the cinematographer, and her son, Gennarello, starred in her film.
And she was also depicting very strong women, which were doing, taking care of all the family, and but had the father, maybe alcoholic father, violent husband, and that's why the fascists didn't like Elvira Notari. And they censored her a lot. That's why she opened a company in New York, because sometimes it was easier for her to get a visa censorship in New York before having it in Italy. And so it was a very interesting story.
Can I ask you to talk a little bit about the material limitations to restoration, like in general, and also specifically maybe in the case of Santa Notte? Like, what were the challenges that you encountered? And
You want me to say things?
Yes.
No, I just want to say, because what she has to say, I will say this first of all: the lab people are the undersung people in our field. They're not really appreciated for all they do and what they know. And I've been doing this a long time. So I always say that whenever I'm at a presentation, they're the unsung heroes of our field. But I wanted to just make a comment on this because this was a particular production that was based on a theatrical performance called Cineteca. They were live performances. So think of this as these were theatrical performances, and Notari transported this medium to film itself. So there was a lot of interaction between the audience. And for immigrant audiences in the United States, this was very popular. And when we worked on the project, this is part of the methodology that L'Immagine Ritrovato uses. I had found you can describe the prints, and I'll just say first, I had found in New York State Archives an actual censor report on the film. And the copy that we used, it was a copy from Rochester that was found in an Italian collection, was a nitrate copy. And that was tinting references, I think, that film. Yes. But there was also a copy in Rome. But the original nitrate, because it was part of that nitrate era, had been discarded after it was copied. So we did not have any information on the intertitles, which the copy in Rochester had. It had the Neapolitan dialect. And I'll let Celine describe more. But the interesting thing was that in the censor report, there were scenes, and this happens in diverse copies. So just think about copies. We can have more than one copy, different things happening. The censor had said, you've got to cut this out, certain violent scenes. And this was big in the 1910s and 20s. And that print in Rochester did not have the scenes cut out. So that was a thing. And then Celine can tell you how they dealt with the two different prints and that information. I think that's interesting.
Yes, because the film was well known in Cineteca Nazionale. They had copies, but this copy had been made from this nitrate print that Kim was talking about in a time where Cineteca had to choose how to spend her money. So on one side, it was to invest in preservation for the creation maybe of cellas, etc., or to be able to print from the original copies, so to preserve the image, because some of the nitrates were decaying, chemically decaying, which is the most important problem in this field. And but then they had to discard it because they didn't know how to preserve these decaying nitrates. Okay, so they had to make this choice, and this is a choice that was the choice of many film institute at that time. There were no budget for both things. But the problem that from this original copy, they print two copies without color, because of course there was no way to reproduce tinting and toning from the original nitrate. And these two copies were badly copied because they didn't have a machine that could adjust to the physical condition of that nitrate, because nitrate tend to shrinken. So when you are copying it on a new film stock, the film stock is a little bigger. And so the two framing doesn't match. And so it makes a printing which was, generally speaking, good, because we are talking about very old films, but it has some little defects. And the fact that we could find an original copy, which was the one from Rochester, not only helped us to reconstruct the two versions, which were differently edited because of censorship, but also we could have back a better image than the one we had in the Italian copy. And what we do in restoration in this case is we do some integration, which means we decide which version we want to restore. So let's say it could be a critical choice, so the version that was shown at a specific cinema, the premiere at a specific festival, or we want to restore, for example, director's cut. Those are critical choices. The important thing is always to say at the beginning of the film which kind of version you're going to see, if it's the director's cut or the projection for the press or for a festival. In this case, we wanted to get, of course, the film as long as possible, because that was the version, the original version of Elvira Notari, and so we go through a philological work of comparing the copies to understand where the editing is different and which will be the best material to choose. In our lab, theoretically, the choice is always the aesthetic issue. I mean, I will maybe choose a shot which has some frame less, but with a better photographic quality, because this is film, is photography. So that's the most important thing. When a director is making a film, is always thinking about to make it beautiful. And so if we have a copy which is closer to what was the original photography of the film, we have to choose that shot. Once the comparison is made, then we have we're going to restore all the parts that we need from different elements. In the case of this film, we also had to reconstruct the intertitles, and the copy from Rochester also had a lot of information, because usually the film were traveling in Europe, so they were distributed with editing was the same, basically, apart from censorship, and then they put just little piece of film leader with maybe with the handwritten the first part of intertitle. And so then when the film arrived in the other country, they could make the intertitles in their own languages. And so they had a reference on the film. And these kind of little leader are very, very important for the history of cinema. And also, because the film had to be tinted and toned, there were also information about the color. So a piece of leader with, for example, LA, so light amber, or it was blue, or it was green. So the letter for the color. Sometimes they are codes, sometimes they're a letter, but it's a very important information in the history of cinema, because silent cinema, especially in Europe, was never black and white. This is something that come after, but it was color tinted and toned, and in Italy with very, very bright colors. So there was a lot of violet, and green and blue, and these colors had a code. So for the night, for drama, for a daily light, for an evening, something romantic. So it was following some color codes, and so all this information were in the copy. So that's important, really, before starting the restoration, really to collect all information that the film itself can give you, because that's where you find documented information. And in restoration, you cannot make hypotheses. If something is not documented, you just don't do it. Maybe someone say, I remember that what shot was so and so, but okay, you can write it in an article, but you cannot make a restoration based on something which is not a fact. And this is important because one of the guidelines of restoration is that it has to be reversible. So the restoration is the process of restoring the image, but the film has to be preserved as it was when it arrived in the lab. So sometimes you maybe need to, for example, divide it in parts because you need a particular scan or a particular chemical treatment, etc. But then you have to give it back to the archive as much as possible as it was in the original, clean, without, for example, old tape of glue that can enhance the chemical decay. But the important thing is stay focused. I mean, stay faithful to the original. Okay, so these are two moments of restoration, because restoration itself is just reestablish the functionality of the film, which of course is not a single piece, is a industrial process, and it's a long process before it can be seen on a screen.
Thank you. So this is something that all of you in one way or another kind of like touched on, and it's this idea of the relationship between preservation, restoration, and access, which seems to be like a crucial question for all of you in different ways. And so basically the question is, starting from your own experience in your own field, and this is addressed to all of you, so maybe we'll start with Siobhan first. How would you characterize the impact that the digital turn has on access, for instance, within, in the case of Siobhan, for instance, your own specific Marmia project?
Yeah, so one thing in particular about preservation is you have to think about it in different ways. Like, are you thinking about preserving the content? The essence is another way that people have put it. Or are you trying to preserve the physical object more than the content itself? So it is an integral part of preservation of a 35 millimeter nitrate film, for example. I've never seen nitrate projected, and I know that I'm missing out. Like, I know that is just an experience that a lot of people are working to preserve, but it's not going to be around forever. However, I've seen lots of films that were originally shot on and projected in nitrate. And I've seen them because they've been digitized and they've been scanned and they've been put to like VHS tapes and much lower quality and a totally different experience. But I got to see like, I got to go through the emotions of the story and like that, but didn't quite get the same like physicality of the experience. So that aspect of preservation gets missed. So for me, in my work, I also work mostly with like small gauge film, is what we call it, which is just more home movie formats or like local news. So this is smaller than the typical 35 millimeter that it is usually what was projected in movie palace or things like that. So it's usually 16 millimeter, Super 8, 8. And then I also work a lot and honestly mostly with video. So I have to bring it up, even though it said film restoration, because it's all moving images, right? And many times it's all about, sometimes it's about the content. So for example, I was going to show, I sent it in too late, but I was going to show a film from Marmia's collections. I say film and I'm wrong. But so from Marmia's collections is actually a personal film of mine. It's from my family. And it's a film of my Serbian great-grandfather in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, just sitting on the row home on Real Street with my Aunt Tina, who was 3 at the time. It was 1953. And they're just like hanging out. And they walk the street a little bit too, so you get to see an old car and like that. Which is fun for people who are from Harrisburg, right? And my family who know these people. But I, in and of itself, it's like, oh, that's a great memory. I get to see my great grandfather move. It's silent, so I don't get to hear him or anything like that. But I've never met him, so I get to see him. I get to see my aunt when she's 3. There are puppies, like it's adorable. So that was exciting. Everybody loves puppies, right? So, but another aspect of that is that I digitized it from a VHS. So it was originally shot on 16 millimeter. And then in 1989, my grandma, I have forgiven her for this, but she took the 16 millimeter, some of them beautiful color 16 millimeter films, took them to the Hills department store and in Harrisburg and got them transferred to VHS and just left them there. And someone just like threw the original 16 millimeter away. So to grandma's credit, like her main point was the essence. It was the content. I want access. We don't have a working projector anymore for 16 millimeter. It's 1989. We have a VCR. So like, how is she going to actually show us and make it accessible? And at that time, that was the way. So I just wish that she had, along with like every other piece of like silverware she's ever owned in her life, hoarded that as well, but she didn't. But that's okay. Like I said, I forgave her. Because I think it's actually also really an interesting point, because I'm not the only one. I'm sure everybody that took their film to Hill's department store in the 1980s, lost it because they just didn't think and they didn't realize how much higher quality of 16 millimeter is than a standard definition VHS tape. So while I'm just so grateful that I even have anything, honestly, it was pretty rare for people to have 16 millimeter cameras, at least at my family's level of income. So I'm very grateful for that. But I like to always kind of over explain things. And there's a fun term that makes it sound more maybe academic, which is like informed consent. Because I want people to understand what they're getting and what they're sacrificing in this, because we can't preserve everything, we can't restore everything. Certainly there's always there's never enough money. There's so many decisions that have to be made about what gets preserved, what gets collected, what gets transferred, what is then how it's made accessible. So just that fact, I think I like people to know, okay, so there are these film scanners that cost 6 figures, and they could do that 16 millimeter, or let's say a Super 8 at like 2K or 4K, which is a type of resolution that's creates very, very extremely large digital files. That's lovely, beautiful, to look at. But realistically, most people don't have a computer that then can play back those files or even store them because they're huge digital files. So even though it's a beautiful quality, are they going to actually be able, if it's a home movie or if it's a small regional archive like Marmia, are they going to be able to play them back and see that essence? So even in the world of digital, even though we talk about the digital turn, I also like to say that like we do have to find that happy medium. We have to know what we're sacrificing, so we have to be informed about the technology, and then that's what I'm passionate about, is trying to take all these like technological jargon and make it more understandable, because I don't have a technical background originally, and if I can learn it and eventually understand it, you don't have to understand all of it, like anyone can. So that's, to me, where I usually lean more towards accessibility and access to the content, especially when it comes to regional archives and home movies, and like lower resource or typically like marginalized communities who are just like strapped for cash and strapped for all resources. I think the seeing someone like see a home movie or see their grandparent again or their parent again that they haven't seen move, and have them hear their voice again, even if it's like not in 4K or not in like, stereo or whatever. It's the emotion of it is so beautiful that like I want that first and foremost, that like memory before anything else. So and that's why I forgave my grandma.
Thank you. So let me relay one of the question that you raised, Siobhan, to the other two panelists, which is this idea of basically the question of access. What goes into the decision of what gets preserved and what doesn't? So we talked about small gauge media and rare media in the case of Siobhan's project, the Marmia Archive. I'm wondering if Celine and Kim can talk about what happens when studios get involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm just going to say this: technology and the studios direct the field. They always have. I mean, technology doesn't just happen. It's expensive. So when we think of the digital turn, I remember being at a conference in 2006, Association of Moving Image Archivists, and I was there with my European, mostly male colleagues, and there was somebody, Grover Chris from Columbia Pictures, who's a main preservationist there. And they had studio people there, and they were going to talk about digital. Well, the auditorium cleared out, and everybody went to a reception but us. And he was pitching Grover Crisp the fact that the studios are looking at digital technology. Now, at this time, Europe is already on the digital turn. As Celine said, this is 2006, but it's starting in the 2000s because Europe was ahead. They invested in that. They invested resources too. There was a lot of, if we have the NEA, there was a lot of grant. It was a long stretch. And when the money stopped, things shifted. So the industry, I forgot the question, but the industry drives a lot of our decisions. And this is the same in the museum world today. Mostly foundations and our public support our art. This is a global phenomena because we don't have the same kind of institutional funding through national or regional. Bologna is an incredible example. Italy is a cinema country. It just is. It always has been. It has a long history of cinema going way back for the public. Screenings outside, large screens. But regionally, Bologna invested and still does as a regional location in its cinema and in the art. Now here, you see, we're fortunate at the federal government, but who's going to support the art world and especially film? We're not talking about an object in a museum. We're talking about copies. And storage, digital storage, is very expensive, folks. The size of the file, putting them up. I will tell you the number of times the library's tried to put up on its screening room material, very short, brief, silent material, and it comes down. I mean, there's different types of investment at different times, and that affects what gets restored, how it gets restored, and what doesn't. What was interesting, I mean, I've been in the field for a long time, and it's been interesting to see the changes in the way people try to problem solve and try to bring things to a broader audience. I think that's still the goal. And home movies were always of interest. They were always collected. I love Super 8. I've shot in Super 8. I have a Super 8 projector and camera. And I've shot films in Italy. But I guess that I say to some of my colleagues that are teaching in preservation programs, they're like, oh, well, you know, advertising films and videotape and small gauge. Well, no, we were interested in it, but maybe the resources to support getting it out there weren't there. Why? Because smaller gauges, 16 is considered small gauge, when I never really considered it that, because it was a preservation medium in the early years. But you'd have the gates, like as Celine said, the technology, they'd have to create gates for these smaller gauges on the printers in order for the films to go through. The paper prints themselves, which are paper rolls, there's still challenges digitally to get the paper rolls steadily through the scanner and clear. And that's, you know, you have digital tools that can make them more clear. I guess what I'm trying to say is, yes, when it comes to what gets done and what doesn't, there are many factors, but keep in mind, this is a very expensive undertaking. And the larger picture, one example I'll give is Netflix. When Andre Cuarón made Roma, it was up on Netflix at the same time it was in the theater. So to get wider distribution, why? To make more money. And when I was lecturing in a class for film history, the students were shocked in the remarks I got when I said, well, DVDs may be gone. Well, Netflix is getting rid of DVDs. And tape, actually, film transfer to tape, digital Betacam, at the beginning of the digital, it was mostly tape. So these are shifts in things, and history kind of repeats itself. I always say we're kind of in a World War I kind of moment. The beginning of the motion picture industry is like AI today. There's no regulations, there's no standards. You know, think about what you do every day on your phone. Some young people, they're very comfortable with watching a film on the phone. I don't mind, but I really like seeing something at a festival in CinemaScope. It's the big screen, you know, so it's what kind of experience do you want? How do you want to access and interact with the medium?
Celine?
Yes, okay. So my point of view is the one from, I tell you, the lab is a private company. It's a private company owned by a foundation, but it had always been a private company. And this is why we are still here, because we were on the market. So we were faster. We never say no. So we're doing this, we're doing that. And we have a working structure quite different from one of the archive, which of course the aim of labs from archive was to preserve their own collection. For the lab in Bologna was to restore everything that could come. So we have clients, which are public or private institutions, but they are clients. So we have our protocol in how we are doing things, but the decision about the restoration are always from the curator, if it's a public archive, or the expert of the manager for conservation from the private companies, which can be Pathé, Gaumont. We work for Sony, Paramount, and then we have, because we have a company also in Hong Kong and one in Paris, and so also the Asian market. So it's something that, how can I say, we suggest how to do things, but then the decision is made by people who have different idea about the restoration, because of course a production company is something which is It's okay for them to restore their past library because they can add content, but they are also very much in the present, or investing in the cinema of the present, of the future, and they have also an aesthetic which sometimes it doesn't marry very well with the protocol of film restoration, because you cannot transform a film from the 20s or the 30s in a contemporary production. And this is for image and for sound. For sound is even worse because you have a mono film and you have to put it in like 20 channel of the cinema, but just faking it. But then you need to preserve this sound which comes from the screen and not all around. But our policy was to open the lab to these people, so to understand what we were doing and why we were doing it. And so this was also helpful for people who didn't know how to make restoration. So we never had secret. The clients could come and see the film repaired, the film scanned. They can evaluate everything, so they could understand why we suggested some solution instead of others. And of course, we do not archive things. We are a service company, so the archive is a problem of the client. And I think it's a problem because, for example, I can, just to give you some numbers, one reel of 300 meters, I don't know the feet, it's like the format of negative roll. It's like 10-minute films, and it can go up to 2 or 3 terabytes. So imagine a film which may have 11 reels, 14 reels. When we restored the Italian film Novecento, we had a lot of material, so we call it the 100 because it has 100 terabytes of data in our server, and we were desperately waiting for the client to ask us to make the backup and to get the files and to close the project, because we were stuck in every department with this terabyte of film. For example, we to the clients we give a backup of the original scan, so with no intervention, because that's the preservation, and we do overscan. So when you see our scan, you also see part of the perforation. So if there is something written on the borders, they can be recorded, and then we give them the restored files also in a raw format. So it's the standard for cinema is extension, which is called DPX, digital picture exchange, and every 5 single DPX correspond to a frame. So within the production, the post-production and the restoration of the film, you are always using these heavy files. Once you go to the cinema or for the all other digital derivatives, you are doing some encoding, and of course the size is smaller, but the quality decreases. So, but then you give to them in an hard drive, and the hard drive need to be moving files. You cannot just stock them like a book. They need movements, activities, so they need to have a server. Now, many of our clients are struggling with having a platform because they want the content to be accessible to Netflix, movie, national television, etc. And it's a lot of space and a lots of money to be spent. And this results in the fact that the quality of the final product is a bit decreasing, even if, for example, Netflix has a special standard. So if you're watching your film on a phone or on a big screen, it's not the same things. They have different encoding that can differentiate the experience of your film. But there is this big amount of data which are not accessible. As Siobhan was saying, I can play the film in 4K in our machine, in our workstation, but not always is playing at the right speed because maybe there is a heavy traffic, etc. And the standard of the market is still 4K, but the scan can also scan 8K. But even if they tell you so, I've never seen an 4K film playing smoothly in a machine. Not because it's technologically impossible, but it's because it's not affordable for the market. Cinema is still an industry, so they set their standard. So that's why we have a quite cheap system of backup, which is tape LTO, magnetic tape, and they can have up to 8 terabyte, but they just last like 3 years. And not because they got broken, but because the Sony every 2 or 3 years changes the standard. And so if you have a LTO5, you may not be able to read it, or you cannot read the LTO9 in an old machine. So you need to migrate continuously the data, and that's very expensive. We use those backup just to clean the server and to keep the data till the very end of the project, because maybe there are big projects that last for 3, 4, or 5 years because not all the material has been found for the film, or because there is so many problems. It's right clearance in Italy for the films. Italian movies, it's always a jungle. A paradise for lawyers because the companies were broken, so some sons have some rights and then are to the cousins or to companies that doesn't exist anymore, and this is a very big problem for restoration and also for to make them accessible, because for example, we have a colleague from Studio Canal. She wanted to do an edition of Dario Argento movies. And at the time she was working with Studio Canal Plus, she couldn't find the rights for some film in Italy. So she went to Germany because many of them are German-Italian production. And so she got the German copy and then she put the Italian sound because she wasn't able to find the rights. But also film from, for example, Vittorio De Sica. He used to play the rights of his film on the gambling table. So, so you can imagine where to find them back. So, or families who doesn't want to give the film because they think that you are making a lot of money with restoration, so they want to have a piece of the cake, and you say, no, we're just restoring it. If you want, the film is yours. You go to Netflix and you try to sell it, but so it's very complicated also from that point of view. And yes, I think on one side technology helped us very much in restoration, because when the company Arnold und Richter, the ARI, which is a company who has worked in the field of cinema since the beginning of cinema, invented the ARI scan. That was a turning point in digital restoration because it was a scanner that could scan material which was very shrunken, every gauge, every gauge, and even films without perforation on one side. That was the turning point because it was a scan made for archive. And with the German technology, which is always perfect. And also we worked a lot with them. So we Italians, we asked for strange things, but they were very good in creating some new parts of the machine and making the dreams come true for us. And so the Ariscan was a turning point because we, for example, we got it in 2009 because we were starting to restore the Lumière film, so the first film of history of cinema, before the Edison standard. So they have just one perforation, circular perforation, and it was impossible to pull them into a normal machine to correctly print a copy or preserve it. With the Ariscan, we were able to scan them. Even they had sometimes a problem, so the emulsion, the films are in very good condition because Lumière films were really good into making emulsion and film. But at the certain points of their life, some of the emulsion was detaching from the base. And we were worried that we had to put tape on that. But once you put it, then you cannot take it away because it will take away all the emulsion of the film. But in the scan, we were able to scan by hand and we didn't need to put tape. We were moving the film in the scan. And the machine was helping us to do that because you can calibrate it really according to the condition of the film. And we had also some out format like 9 millimeters, 9.5, but they were not 9.5 anymore. So we were using the 60 millimeter gauge of the scan, and then we make some adjustment with cardboard and and tape, and we were able to scan it because the engine was so soft that you could use really
Is it the German company calling?
yes, maybe.
Since we are approaching the end of our allotted time, I'm wondering if there are any questions from the audience. Oh, many questions. Microphone is coming.
Thank you. Thank you to the four of you. Thank you very much for your talk and the roundtable in general. It's been very, very interesting. And I would like to ask you like a reflection about what you were saying about the lack of faith in the analog in a way, because as in art history or architecture, sometimes progress or the idea of progress makes us think that technology is going to be the solution of all our problems. And in fact, the title of this roundtable gives us an idea that from analog to digital, that it's an evolution and that digital is going to be the best solution. And in fact, it isn't. It should be from analog to digital, but please always preserve the analog. And I would like to ask you if you have had any experience, for example, with public institutions that sometimes have other priorities and prefer, okay, let's go digital, let's keep everything in digital supports, let's forget about the piece, yes, the analog supports, let's go everything digital. And then how can you convince them these authorities, let's say, or these heritage decision makers, to 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 keep the analog support too? Thank you.
I can take that.
Don't look at me. I'm not answering that question.
I don't think that we have to necessarily think of it as the digital is better. We were talking a little bit earlier about this whole idea of let's make the thing perfect. And we're going to create this ideal thing. There's a lot of people that when the digital came in, they still like this, the cinephiles, my close friends at festivals. Oh, I'm not seeing any of the digital. I only want to see the analog. And there's some great analog stuff that is beautiful as well as there's digital. But again, it's about the industry and access. And I don't think that that archives, which are not the industry, okay, they are not, nor collections that are in many places. There are film collections in universities, there are private collectors, and they do their own thing. So films are everywhere. They're not just in institutions. We have to keep that in mind. But I think that with analog in institutions still, they make a negative usually. I don't know in Europe if they're doing that at Bologna, but most archives will keep a negative, which is the closest to the original artifact and can be scanned or in either medium. And for example, there was a great film at the festival, Bushman. It comes out of the LA cinema movement, LA Rebellion, the 60s. UCLA did a big thing, it was shown at Bologna. It's a wonderful. And I noticed when it was shown at the National Gallery, because I didn't see it in Bologna, I was in another screening, that Ross Lipman, who was a colleague of mine at UCLA, he's no longer there, but he's a wonderful preservationist. He did also do the preservation in analog. He did the negative, and it was in the intertitles of the restoration. And I know the Imagine Ritrovato, we did that. Many institutions can do that. The George Eastman Museum, it is part of their policy, but it is extremely expensive to do all of it. This is the thing. And as Siobhan said, there's a lot of things to restore, and then there's informed consent restrictions, as Celine said, copyright or tourism. There's so many things. So, but I don't think that institutions themselves and the International Federation of Film Archives, BIAF, motto a number of years ago. It's probably still there. Don't throw old film away. They didn't even want you to throw scrap away, like parts of Leader. And as Celine said, I've known colleagues that have cut really important information off of the nitrate, and I'm like, what are you doing? So there's no sort of standard in restoration either. I do think that the Immagine Ritrovato, of the many laboratories I work in, and I can tell you in 2008, a vast portion of the laboratories closed. And more recently, as Celine said, they have been very skillful at absorbing the work of a number of institutions. Most archives, they don't have their own lab. Okay, they outsource. And that's an important thing. As she said, you have to deal with the client. What are their goals? What are their things? So back to the analog. If the client wants to make the negative and gets the money, they'll do it. It's simply that. But I don't think it's the people purposely. They're not throwing film away.
Also, for example, when we get in contact with people, for example, for advertisement company, which had a lot of 60 millimeters, also 35, they come and they don't really know about restoration. Maybe someone told them about us, about the lab, etc. But then we always talk about what they are doing with the film. Because, for example, Cineteca di Bologna is not a national film institute, so they don't have the legal deposit. The collection of Cineteca di Bologna are made by donation or found of film that were saved from destruction. And so it offered the service to, you came to us, you do the restoration, and then why not letting the film in our facility? We have building a new archive, we have a nitrate archive, so they will be okay, and you can get them whenever you want, and maybe we can have an idea about restoration project, etc. And this is important because maybe they come with one or two films, but then they have a huge collection with smaller things, but they are historically important. And yes, as Kim said, all our big clients with big budgets, they do film recording, which is you go back to film. And that's why I took with me piece of film which were printed in the lab. And so if you want, I will pass them so you can have a look at the material while you listen to the rest of the conservation, because I think it was important for you to see the film. There are negatives, there are positive elements with different soundtrack, different formats, and this is all done in the lab. So we still for us, film is still matter, because this is the origin of the items we are restoring.
Yes, please.
I think Celine kept mentioning Rochester, and I'm guessing you're referring to Eastman Kodak. And I just wonder, what role did Kodak have, if any, in film restoration? And they were particularly accused of being very slow going from analog to digital. That's why they're nearly bankrupt now.
I don't know exactly about that, because with Kodak, of course, our relationship with Kodak was always great, because we wanted to make film on film, and but that's the studios that decide the standard. I mean, that's the thing. So it's, you have to keep the pace, and restoration, we just keep the pace because we use the same tools as a post-production company with a different aim. But the problem is now that they're still doing film stock, but you have to pre-order, and sometimes they just stop it and don't tell you why. So last year we had like 2 months without our film, because they didn't come. We didn't know what was happening, how long it would take to have it, and so we are always thinking about this moment where they will stop to make film. I hope not, because actually now some production also Hollywood start again to use a lot 60 millimeters, but also some 35 millimeter for specific scene. And I think that would be great because they can, I mean, these are two different media that can be used both to make film. But of course, film is expensive. Is expensive.
And I just want to like also interject about the first question too of like the letting go of perfection. I think there's room for analog, there's room for digital. I think by learning about analog and like the analog to digital process, you can appreciate them both more. And like we're all getting older, we're all gonna die. We can't preserve ourselves forever, and we can't preserve these things forever. And like so let's enjoy them. Let's share them. I mean, that's like to me. I want people to get value out of it, and to me, I would love to see a nitrate film projected, but like I think that might get lost, like or not lost, but like it just might not be that valuable to other people, or to someone else who would just wants to see it on their laptop or whatever. To me, it's like we're relying on Kodak, we're relying on these companies, Sony, that like make these pieces of technology, and luckily sometimes that trickles down, and they make these like much cheaper versions so that we can create these like access copies. But sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes things have disappeared in the meantime. So to me, it's like just being grateful that we're here, and like let's try and preserve as much as we can. But part of that is part of like the work of preservation to me is accepting that you can't preserve everything and like letting go of the perfection.
Any other questions? We have time for one more and a short answer. Yes, right there. Yeah, he's one of my students, so yeah.
Thank you.
There's two of them that came today, so an applause to them, please. Thank you. Thank you all.
I appreciate the bias, Mauro. So I believe Kim and Shaban, you've already touched on this a little bit, but I wonder, all three of you, what are your perspectives, both as professionals working with primarily film, but also as cinephiles, on, I guess, the changing industry, and particularly in terms of the transition from film acquisition and exhibition, both to digital acquisition and exhibition?
Oh, you want me to? Well, I maybe I should start that because you're saying about acquisitions, and as I've done acquisitions for many years, and the thing is, okay, storage. How much can we store? Where do we put it? It's a big problem. Storage is extremely expensive, and I dealt with many large collections. And Shaban talked about 16 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. I'll get rid of 16. Let's dump it. I mean, okay. Then all of a sudden, 16's hot. So there are like these shifting trends about things like acquisitions, access, whatever. I'd say now, it isn't even just with film. I just did a finding aid because people can't find things. They finding things is a problem because there's so much information up there and people want to find things. So things shift depending on, just think of a museum. Who went to museums before? Museums today and festivals, they want to bring the public in. This is a good, it's like Shaban's saying, it's not just for selective people. Film festivals, museums, exhibitions, that's why we need to support the arts, is who's going in and what are they showing and what are they prioritizing? Because I'm not going to get into the history of the arts movements in this country because I know a lot about it and stakeholders that sort of invest in, but people that give the money often dictate what we get. So it's important that the public, no matter what means, as Shaban is saying and Celine too, we have to overcome these obstacles, shift the priorities, because you can't, this thing of saving everything, by the way, collecting, I work on collecting as a practice. is a 19th century Western practice. Okay? So this thing of collecting, there's a point where, where are we going to put it all? How much are we going to collect? I mean, this practical thing. So these things shift. So I don't know if that answers your question in a way, but I'll let the others weigh in.
Oh yeah, and is it ours to collect? That's the other thing of like why I love community archiving so much and personal archiving. It's you are empowering people to preserve themselves, and that's where the informed consent comes in. So if people are like, "Oh, I have the 16, I want to preserve the 16," I'm gonna invest in getting like good cold storage. Or they're like, you know what? I know the sacrifices I'm making. I understand I only have these resources, but this is part of our community and we're just gonna put it up on YouTube and like share it. And that's like our call because it's ours. So I think that's a really great point.
I would just add that I'm on the side of preservation, of course, and film, but since I also come from a country where every piece of art is preserved, and if you dig and you find the 2000 street, the Roman street, everybody is enthusiastic, and they say, "Oh, why don't we just take away the new and walk on the old?" And that is things like that. So it's a very extreme way of preserving the past. But about the distribution, I mean, making film and distributing content, for example, I think on these things, I think I agree with Shavan that I like to restore films so the people can see them. So I'm not an enemy of Netflix. I mean, Netflix, if the public ask for something, Netflix will pay for it. I mean, they had a great funding for the restoration of Abel Gance Napoleon in France from Cinémathèque Française. It's a 14 years project. I don't know if the public of Netflix is ready to the 7-hour projection, but Abel Gance already thought about the 12 episodes of his film. So it was because serial existed since the silent movies. So, but then they existed in newspapers. So I don't think the media is changing what you are doing now, but it's just a way to show things. Working with the archive material, for example, in my work, I deal a lot with really archival material from the archive of Cineteca di Bologna. There are all the silent movies filmed that no one has seen. They are exceptional. Something like Witness of Wars, a film that had been in the 1910s or 12 or 15, and they show images that I don't think today nobody would screen even on TV or like that because of the violence and the reality. So I would like these films to be shown somewhere because we restore them, they're in the archive and they need space. And some of them are out of right now, so they could be, but it's difficult to make them get closer to the public because they are just screened at the festival once a year. So you try to gather as much people as possible so they can understand. But then it's difficult to see them. And but for example, during COVID, we were, for example, we were still working because we were considered essentials. And what we did was producing content for the platform because people were at home and they were just getting to Netflix movie, which is more artistical in Europe. So and they asked us for things that we say, really? That's great. And so, but that make a switch into, so people are more interested in restoration because of the festival. And I hope that then, of course, restoration of film stock won't be eternal. But since we work, for example, with India and Asia, there's a big amount of film to be shown and shared also because.
Okay, so I think we reached our allotted time, the time limit. So let me please join me in thanking our panelists today, Kim, Celine, and Siobhan, for a really interesting conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you again. And there are some refreshments outside, so all the questions that you couldn't ask before, you are welcome to ask them during the reception. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. I know we could have obviously gone for like
Yeah,
more
it's-
hours.
Yes.
Got like halfway through the outline. Yeah.
Thank you.